Ezekiel Zeke Morrison had been riding the same trail for 3 days when he saw the smoke rising in the distance. His weathered hands pulled the reins of his sorrel mare, Duchess, as his steel-gray eyes squinted against the harsh afternoon sun. At 42, Zeke had seen enough death and destruction to last several lifetimes. The war had taken his youth, and the frontier had hardened what remained of his soul. The smell hit him first, that sickening sweet stench of death, mixed with the acrid smoke of burned canvas and wood. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 holstered at his hip as he approached the wreckage of what had once been a small wagon train. 3 wagons in total, all burned out husks now, with bodies scattered around like broken dolls. Apache, most likely, or maybe Comanche, didn't matter. Much to the dead. That's when he heard a sound so soft he almost missed it over the desert wind. A whimper, a child's cry. Zeke dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the sandy ground littered with personal belongings that would never be claimed. Behind the middle wagon, partially hidden in its shadow, sat a little girl no more than 6 years old. Her brown hair hung in dirty tangles around her face, and her blue dress was torn and stained with dust and something darker. She was holding the hand of a woman, her mother, judging by the resemblance, who lay still as stone beside the wagon wheel. "Mama won't wake up," the child whispered when she saw Zeke approaching. Her voice was hoarse from crying and thirst. "I tried and tried, but she won't wake up." Zeke stopped about 10 feet away, removing his worn hat out of respect for the dead. The woman had been shot clean through the chest. There was nothing to be done for her now. But the child was alive, and that meant something in this godforsaken wilderness. "What's your name?" "Little one," Zeke asked, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "Evangeline," she said, still clutching her mother's cold hand. "Evangeline May Hartwell. This is my mama, Constance. She said we were going to California to find Papa, but the bad men came and—" Her voice trailed off into another sob. Zeke looked around at the carnage. No survivors except for this one small girl. The raiders had taken everything of value and left the rest to burn. Standard practice for these parts. What wasn't standard was finding someone alive to tell about it. "Evangeline," Zeke said, crouching down to her level but keeping his distance. Frightened children were like wild animals. Sudden movements could send them running. "I'm Zeke. I'm going to help you, but first we need to get you some water. When's the last time you had a drink?" The girl thought for a moment, her small face scrunched up in concentration. "Yesterday morning, I think. Before the shooting started." Zeke's jaw tightened. She'd been sitting here for over a day, probably afraid to leave her mother's side. He walked back to Duchess and retrieved his canteen, then returned to the girl. "Here," he said, offering her the water. "Drink slow, just small sips." Evangeline finally released her mother's hand and took the canteen with both of hers. She drank greedily at first, then forced herself to slow down when Zeke reminded her to be careful. "We can't stay here, Evangeline," Zeke said after she'd had her fill. "It's not safe. The men who did this might come back, and besides, your mama, she needs to be laid to rest proper." "I can't leave her," Evangeline said, shaking her head violently. "She'll be all alone." Zeke's heart, which he'd thought had turned to stone years ago, cracked just a little. He'd lost his own family during the war, his wife Martha and baby son Thomas to fever while he was off fighting Yankees. He knew what it meant to lose everything. "Your mama wouldn't want you to stay here and die with her," he said carefully. "She'd want you to live, to grow up strong and happy. That's what mothers want for their children." It took another hour of gentle coaxing, but eventually Evangeline agreed to let Zeke bury her mother. He found a spot about 50 yards from the wagon train, under a lone cottonwood tree that provided some shade. The ground was hard as rock, but Zeke had plenty of experience digging graves. As he worked, Evangeline sat nearby, talking to her mother as if she were still alive. She told her about the pretty flowers she'd seen along the trail, about the rabbit that had hopped right up to their wagon 2 days ago, about how much she missed Papa and couldn't wait to see him. In California, when the grave was finished, Zeke said a few words over Constance Hartwell. He wasn't much of a praying man anymore, but he figured every soul deserved to be commended to whatever came after this life. Evangeline picked some wildflowers and placed them on the mound of earth. "Will you take me to Papa now?" she asked as they walked back toward Duchess. Zeke had been dreading this question. "Evangeline, I don't know where your papa is. California's a big place, bigger than you can imagine, and I got business that takes me in the opposite direction." The girl's face fell, and Zeke felt like he'd just kicked a puppy. "Then where will I go?" she asked, her voice small and lost. That was the question, wasn't it? The nearest town was Tombstone, about 2 days' ride south. There might be someone there willing to take in an orphan girl, though more likely she'd end up in some church orphanage back east. Either way, it meant she'd probably never see her father again. Zeke studied the child's face, dirty and tear-streaked, but with an inner strength that reminded him of Martha. His late wife had possessed that same quiet determination, that refusal to give up even when things looked hopeless. "I reckon you'll come with me for now," he heard himself saying, "at least until we can figure out something better." Evangeline's face lit up like sunrise after a long, dark night. "Really, you mean it?" "I mean it," Zeke said, though he was already wondering what the hell he was getting himself into. "But we got to get some things straight between us. I ain't your papa, and I ain't looking to be. I'm just helping you out until we can find you a proper home." "Understood, understood," Evangeline said solemnly. Though she was practically bouncing with relief, Zeke fashioned a makeshift seat for her behind his saddle using some canvas he'd salvaged from the wagons. Duchess wasn't used to carrying two riders, but she was a steady mare and didn't fuss much about the extra weight. As they rode away from the site of the massacre, Evangeline twisted around to wave goodbye to her mother's grave. Zeke felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he'd thought was buried along with his own family. "Where are we going?" Evangeline asked after they'd been riding for about an hour. "North, toward Flagstaff," Zeke replied. "I got some business to tend to there. After that, well, we'll figure it out as we go." The truth was, Zeke was hunting a man named Cole Brennan, a half-breed outlaw who'd been terrorizing settlements throughout the territory. There was a $1,000 bounty on Brennan's head, dead or alive, and Zeke needed that money to buy back his family's ranch in Texas. He'd lost it to gambling debts after the war, but the current owner was willing to sell it back for the right price. Having a child along was going to complicate things considerably. He couldn't very well drag Evangeline into dangerous situations, but he also couldn't afford to abandon his hunt for Brennan. The man's trail was still relatively fresh, and if Zeke waited too long, he'd lose it entirely. They made camp that evening near a small creek about 20 miles from the massacre site. Zeke had managed to salvage some supplies from the wagon: train blankets, a few tins of food, and most importantly, some of Evangeline's personal belongings. She clutched a worn rag doll to her chest as she sat by the small fire Zeke had built. "Tell me about your papa," Zeke said as they shared a can of peaches. "What's his name? What's he look like?" "His name is Jonathan Hartwell," Evangeline said, around a mouthful of peaches. "He's tall like you," but not. As she paused, trying to find the right word. "Mean-looking," Zeke suggested with a rare smile. "Scary," Evangeline said seriously. "Papa has kind eyes and he laughs a lot. He went to California to find gold so we could have a big house with a porch and everything. He was going to send for U.S. once he struck it rich." Zeke nodded. Another dreamer chasing fool's gold, leaving his family to fend for themselves. The frontier was full of men like Jonathan Hartwell, good intentions, poor judgment. Still, the man was Evangeline's father, and she had a right to find him if possible. "How long ago did he leave?" Zeke asked. "Last spring," Evangeline said. "Mama said it was March when he went away." She marked it on the calendar. "That was almost 6 months ago. If Jonathan Hartwell was still alive, he could be anywhere from Sacramento to San Francisco by now. Finding him would be like looking for a needle in a haystack, assuming he even wanted to be found." "Did he say where exactly he was headed in California?" Evangeline scrunched up her face and thought. "Someplace with a funny name. Sacramento," Zeke corrected. That narrowed it down some, though not by much. Sacramento was still a big city with thousands of prospectors coming and going. After they'd finished eating, Zeke showed Evangeline how to properly tend a campfire and impressed upon her the importance of never wandering away from camp alone. The wilderness was full of dangers, wild animals, hostile Indians, and men who were worse than either. "Why don't you talk much?" Evangeline asked as they settled down for the night. She was wrapped in a blanket near the fire while Zeke had positioned himself between her and the darkness beyond their camp. "Never saw much point in it," Zeke replied. "Words don't stop bullets or fill empty bellies. Mama always said talking helps people understand each other better." Zeke considered this. "Your mama sounds like she was a smart woman." "She was the smartest woman in all of Missouri," Evangeline said proudly. "She could read and write and do numbers, and she knew all about plants and which ones could make you feel better. When you were sick, what happened to make you all leave?" "Missouri." Evangeline's face darkened. "Bad men came to our farm. They said Papa owed them money. But Mama said that wasn't true. They said if Papa didn't pay up, they'd hurt us. That's when Mama decided we had to go find Papa in California." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Jonathan Hartwell hadn't just been chasing gold, he'd been running from debt. Probably gambling debts from the sound of it. Men like that often promised to send for their families, but never did. Too ashamed to admit they'd failed or too selfish to care. "Go to sleep, Evangeline," Zeke said gently. "Tomorrow's going to be another long day." The next morning brought news. That changed everything. They'd been on the trail for barely an hour when they encountered a cavalry patrol heading south. The sergeant, a weathered man named Murphy, recognized Zeke from their time serving together during the Apache campaigns. "Zeke Morrison," Murphy called out as the patrol drew near. "Haven't seen you since that dust-up at Canyon de Chelly. What brings you to this neck of the woods?" "Hunting Cole Brennan," Zeke replied. "You boys seen any sign of him?" Murphy's face grew serious. "More than sign, I'm afraid. Brennan and his gang hit the mining camp at Copper Creek 3 days ago. Killed 8 men and made off with nearly $2,000 in gold dust." Zeke's blood quickened. Copper Creek was only about 40 miles northeast of their current position. If Brennan was still in the area, this might be Zeke's best chance to catch him. "Which direction were they headed when they left?" Zeke asked. "North, toward the San Francisco peaks." But Zeke, Murphy's eyes shifted to Evangeline, who was listening intently to every word. "This ain't no job for a man traveling with a child. Brennan's gang is 8 strong now, and they're all killers. I appreciate the concern, Sergeant, but I can handle myself." Murphy shook his head. "Maybe so, but what about the little one? You can't fight 8 men while protecting a child." The sergeant was right, and Zeke knew it. But he also knew this might be his only chance to collect that bounty. Without that money, he'd never get his ranch back, never have a real home again. "There's a mission school about 10 miles west of here," Murphy continued. "Sister Catherine runs it, good woman, takes in orphans and such. The girl would be safe there while you conducted your business." Evangeline's hand slipped into Zeke's, her small fingers gripping tight. "You're not going to leave me, are you?" she whispered, looking down into those trusting blue eyes. Zeke felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, someone needed him, not his gun, not his tracking skills, but him. The thought both terrified and warmed him. "No," he said firmly, "I'm not leaving you." Murphy shrugged. "Your choice, but you're making a mistake. Brennan won't hesitate to kill a child if she gets in his way." After the patrol moved on, Zeke sat in his saddle for a long time, weighing his options. He could take Evangeline to the mission school, as Murphy suggested, hunt down Brennan, and come back for her later. It was the smart play, the safe play. But when he looked at the girl's face, he saw something that reminded him of his own childhood, that desperate need to belong somewhere, to have someone who wouldn't abandon you when things got difficult. He'd grown up in a string of foster homes after his parents died, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. "Change of plans," he announced, turning Duchess west instead of north. "We're going to Flagstaff first. I know someone there who might be able to help us." "Help us how?" Evangeline asked. "Help us find your papa," Zeke said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. What he did know was that he couldn't abandon this child, not yet. Maybe not ever. The someone Zeke had in mind was Rebecca Thornfield, a former saloon girl turned respectable businesswoman who ran a boarding house in Flagstaff. Becca was one of the few people Zeke trusted completely, and more importantly, she had connections throughout the territory. If anyone could help him track down information about Jonathan Hartwell, it was her. They reached the outskirts of Flagstaff 3 days later. Just as the sun was setting behind the San Francisco peaks, the town had grown considerably since Zeke's last visit, with new buildings sprouting up along the main street and the railroad bringing in settlers and commerce from back east. Becca's boarding house was a 2-story affair painted yellow with white trim, distinguished from its neighbors by the well-tended flower garden in front. Zeke had helped Becca buy the place 2 years earlier, with money from a particularly lucrative bounty, and she'd been urging him to settle down ever since. "Well, I'll be damned," Becca said as she opened the door to their knock. She was a handsome woman in her mid-30s, with auburn hair pinned up in a practical style and intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. "Zeke Morrison, back from the dead. And who's this little angel?" "Her name's Evangeline," Zeke said. "We need your help, Becca." "Of course you do. Nobody ever comes to see me just for the pleasure of my company." But Becca was smiling as she ushered them inside. "Come on, both of you. You look like you could use a hot meal and a real bed for the night." Over dinner, the first proper meal Evangeline had eaten since before the attack, Zeke explained the situation. Becca listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just taking in the story. "So you want me to help you find this Jonathan Hartwell," she said when Zeke finished. "A man who abandoned his family to chase gold in California." "He didn't abandon us," Evangeline protested. "He went and make us rich so we could all be together again." Becca's expression softened. "Of course he did, sweetheart. And I'm sure he's been working very hard to do just that." Later, after Evangeline had been settled into a room upstairs with a promise of a real bath in the morning, Becca and Zeke sat on the front porch sharing a bottle of whiskey. "She's a sweet child," Becca observed. "Reminds me of myself at that age, before life knocked the innocence out of me." "I don't know what the hell I'm doing, Becca," Zeke admitted. "I'm no good with children. Hell, I'm barely fit for civilized company, and yet here you are, putting her needs ahead of your own. That bounty on Cole Brennan is still out there, isn't it?" Zeke nodded. $1,000. Maybe more by now. Enough to buy back your family's ranch. More than enough. Becca studied his profile in the lamplight streaming from the windows. "So why aren't you out there hunting him instead of playing nursemaid to an orphan girl?" Zeke was quiet for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Because she looked at me the way my boy Thomas used to look at me. Like I was some kind of hero instead of just another broken-down old soldier." "You're not that old," Becca said with a smile. "And maybe it's time you started seeing yourself the way that little girl sees you." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe Thomas and Martha didn't die so you could spend the rest of your life feeling sorry for yourself. Maybe they died so you could learn how to live again." The words hit Zeke like a physical blow. For a moment, he was back in that little cabin in Texas, holding his son's fevered body while Martha wept beside him. He'd been away for 3 months, chasing Apaches with the cavalry, and by the time he got home, it was too late to save either of them. "That's a hell of a thing to say," he said quietly. "It's a hell of a thing to live with," Becca replied. "But living with it doesn't mean you have to stop living." The next morning brought both good news and bad news. The good news was that Becca had already sent telegrams to her contacts in Sacramento, asking about Jonathan Hartwell. The bad news was that Cole Brennan had struck again, this time hitting a stagecoach just south of town. 3 passengers dead, driver wounded. The sheriff told Zeke when he stopped by the jail to report the massacre site they'd found. "Brennan's getting bolder, hitting closer to populated areas." Any idea which way they headed? "North, toward the peaks." "Same as always." Sheriff Dale Hutchins was a good man, but getting on in years, and tracking outlaws through rough country wasn't something he was up for anymore. "I don't suppose you'd be interested in taking a deputy's badge for this." "The town council authorized me to offer $100 plus expenses." Zeke considered the offer. $100 plus the bounty would be more than enough to buy back his ranch and set himself up for a new start. But it would also mean leaving Evangeline behind, possibly for weeks. Thanks, but no, he said finally. I got other responsibilities. Now, Sheriff Hutchins glanced toward the boarding house, where Evangeline was probably having breakfast with Becca, the little girl. Heard about what happened to her family. Terrible thing. Yeah, it is. You know, Zeke, there are folks here in town who'd be happy to take her in. The Reverend and Mrs. Patterson have been looking to adopt, and they're good people. They'd raise her right. Another well-meaning suggestion, another chance to pass off his responsibility to someone else. But as Zeke walked back to the boarding house, he found himself thinking about what Becca had said the night before. Maybe it was time to stop running from responsibility and start embracing it. He found Evangeline in the kitchen, helping Becca prepare lunch for the other boarders. She was standing on a wooden crate so she could reach the counter, carefully, stirring something in a large pot. Zeke, she called out when she saw him. Miss Becca is teaching me how to make stew. She says it's important for everyone to know how to cook. Is that so? Zeke said, accepting a cup of coffee from Becca. Everyone except you, apparently, Becca said with a smirk. This poor child tells me you've been feeding her nothing but hardtack and jerky for the past 3 days. It kept us alive, Zeke protested. Barely. A growing child needs proper nutrition, not just whatever you can carry in your saddlebags. As if to prove her point, Evangeline had already gained some color in her cheeks and was moving with more energy than she'd shown since he'd found her. Good food and a safe place to sleep had worked their magic. Any word from Sacramento? Zeke asked quietly. Becca shook her head. It's still early. These things take time, especially when you're looking for one man among thousands. That afternoon, while Evangeline was napping, Zeke walked the streets of Flagstaff trying to clear his head. The town was bustling with activity, merchants hawking their wares, cowboys spending their wages, families going about their daily business. It was the kind of normal, peaceful life he'd once dreamed of having. He found himself standing in front of the schoolhouse, watching children at play during their recess. Most were around Evangeline's age, laughing and running and being kids. She should be among them, he realized. She should have friends her own age and a stable home and all the things a normal childhood included. Pretty to watch, ain't it? A voice said behind him. Zeke turned to see Reverend Patterson approaching. He was a tall, thin man with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. Reverend, Zeke acknowledged. Sheriff Hutchins told me about the little girl you rescued. Terrible tragedy. What happened to her family? Yes, it was. My wife and I would be honored to take her in if you're looking for someone to care for her. We've been praying for a child to bless our home, and perhaps the Lord has answered those prayers. Zeke studied the Reverend's face. He seemed sincere enough, and God knew the man could provide Evangeline with a better life than a drifting bounty hunter ever could. I appreciate the offer, Zeke said carefully, but the girl's got family in California. I'm hoping to reunite her with her father. Of course, that would be ideal. But if that doesn't work out, Reverend Patterson let the offer hang in the air. I'll keep it in mind. When Zeke returned to the boarding house, he found Evangeline sitting on the front porch swing, looking unusually subdued. What's wrong, little one? He asked, settling down beside her. Miss Becca says you might not be able to find Papa, Evangeline said without looking at him. She says California is very big and lots of people get lost there. Zeke felt a stab of irritation at Becca for being so blunt with the child, but he quickly realized she'd been right to prepare Evangeline for the possibility of disappointment. Miss Becca's a smart woman, he said. Finding your papa might be difficult, but that doesn't mean we won't try. And if we can't find him, what happens to me then? The question he'd been dreading. Zeke looked out at the street, watching a family walk by, mother, father, and 2 young children, all holding hands and laughing together. Then we'll figure something else out, he said finally. Would you want to keep me? The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a campfire. Zeke felt his throat tighten with emotions he'd thought were long buried. Evangeline, he said carefully, I'm not the kind of man who stays in one place very long. I don't have a house or a regular job or any of the things a child needs. But you saved me, she said, finally looking at him with those trusting blue eyes. And you're not mean like the bad men who hurt Mama. And you make me feel safe. When was the last time anyone had felt safe with him? When was the last time he'd felt safe himself? It's complicated, he said lamely. Grown-ups always say that when they don't want to explain something. Evangeline observed with startling accuracy. Before Zeke could respond, Becca appeared in the doorway holding a telegram. This just came from Sacramento, she said. You're going to want to read it. Zeke took the telegram with trembling hands. After all the uncertainty, all the hoping and planning, here was news about Jonathan Hartwell. He unfolded the paper and read the brief message twice before the words sank in. What does it say? Evangeline asked anxiously. Zeke looked at her small, hopeful face and felt his heart break a little more. It says. He cleared his throat and tried again. It says your papa was in Sacramento for about 2 months, working a claim near the American River. But he left there 6 weeks ago. Where did he go? The telegram doesn't say. The man who knew him thinks he might have headed north, toward Oregon. Territory. Evangeline's face fell. Is Oregon very far away? Very far, Zeke confirmed. And that's if he actually went there. He could have gone anywhere. That night, after Evangeline had gone to bed, Zeke and Becca sat up late discussing options. None of them were particularly good. You could head north to Oregon, Becca suggested. Follow his trail. See if you can pick up any leads. With a 6-year-old girl in tow, through country that makes Arizona look civilized, you could leave her here with me. I don't mind having her round, and she seems to have taken a shine to this place. Zeke considered the offer. It was generous, and it would certainly make his search easier. But something about the idea of leaving Evangeline behind didn't sit right with him. What if I don't find him? Zeke asked. What if Jonathan Hartwell is dead or doesn't want to be found or has started a new family somewhere? What then? Then you come back and we figure out what's best for Evangeline. And if I don't come back? Becca was quiet for a moment. Are you planning on not coming back? I'm planning on hunting Cole Brennan after I finish with this wild goose chase. Brennan's not the type to let a man just walk away from a fight. Then, maybe it's time to give up bounty hunting. The suggestion hit Zeke like a slap in the face. Hunting outlaws was all he'd known for the past 10 years. It was what he was good at. What defined him, and do what instead? Settle down and become a shopkeeper. Why not? You've got enough money saved up to start over somewhere. Buy a little farm, raise some crops, maybe some livestock. Give Evangeline the stable home she deserves. I don't know anything about farming. You could learn. People do it all the time. Zeke laughed bitterly. A man like me, playing house with an orphan girl. That's not how the world works, Becca. Maybe it's time the world started working differently. The next morning brought another telegram. This one from a mining supply company in Portland. They'd had a Jonathan Hartwell on their books for about 3 weeks in late August. But he'd left owing money for supplies and hadn't been seen since. At least we know he made it to Oregon, Becca said, trying to find something positive in the news. Or someone using his name did, Zeke replied grimly. Could be he's dead and somebody took his papers. They were sitting at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices while Evangeline played with her doll in the parlor. The girl had been unusually quiet since receiving the news about her father. And Zeke could see the hope slowly draining from her eyes. You have to make a decision, Zeke, Becca said. Either commit to finding this man, whatever it takes, or accept that he's probably gone forever. But don't leave that little girl hanging in limbo. She deserves better than that. Zeke knew she was right. He'd been drifting along, hoping for the best but not really committing to anything. It was the same pattern he'd followed for years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Never caring about anyone enough to risk real pain. There's something else, Becca continued. I heard from Sheriff Hutchins this morning. Cole Brennan hit another target last night, a ranch about 20 miles east of here. Killed the whole family, including the children. Zeke's blood ran cold. How many in his gang now? At least 10, maybe more. And they're not just robbing anymore. Zeke, they're killing for the pleasure of it. The old familiar anger began building in Zeke's chest. Men like Brennan were a cancer on the frontier, spreading death and fear wherever they went. Someone had to stop them, and Zeke was one of the few men with the skills to do it. But sitting in the next room was a little girl who needed him, who trusted him, who looked at him like he was her whole world. How could he risk leaving her an orphan again for the sake of justice? The territorial governor has increased the bounty, Becca added quietly. $1,500. Dead or alive, $1,500, more than enough to buy back his ranch and have money left over for improvements, enough to give Evangeline a real home, with her own room and everything a growing girl could need. I need some air, Zeke said abruptly, standing up from the table. He walked out to the stable behind the boarding house, where Duchess was enjoying a well-deserved rest. The mare nickered softly when she saw him, nuzzling his shoulder in greeting. "What do you think, old girl?" he asked, stroking her neck. We cut out to be farmers," Duchess snorted, which he took as commentary on the idea. "Yeah, that's what I figured. Talking to your horse is either a sign of great wisdom or complete madness." Zeke turned to find Evangeline standing in the stable doorway, still clutching her doll. "In my experience, horses give better advice than most people," he said. Evangeline approached slowly, the way he'd taught her around unfamiliar animals. Duchess was gentle, but it never hurt to be careful. "She's pretty," Evangeline said, reaching up to pet the mare's nose. "What's her name, Duchess?" "Had her for about 5 years now. She's saved my life more times than I can count." "How fast?" "Horse can be the difference between living and dying out here. Duchess is about the fastest, smartest horse I've ever known." Evangeline considered this. "Are you going to leave me here and go look for Papa by yourself?" The direct question caught Zeke off guard. The child was too perceptive for her own good. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "What would you want me to do?" "I want to come with you. I know I'm just a little girl and I can't help much, but I promise I won't be any trouble. I can cook a little bit now, and I know how to take care of a campfire, and I won't cry even if I get scared." The earnestness in her voice nearly broke his heart. "Evangeline, looking for your papa means traveling through some very dangerous country. There are bad men out there, worse than the ones who hurt your mama. But you could protect me, couldn't you? You're not afraid of bad men. If only it were that simple." Zeke was afraid of plenty of things, starting with the possibility of failing. This innocent child who'd already lost so much, being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid, he said. "It means you do what needs to be done even when you are afraid. Then you are brave, because you saved me even though it was dangerous." Zeke looked down at her small face, so serious and trusting, and felt something shift inside him. Maybe Becca was right. Maybe it was time to stop running from responsibility and start embracing it. "All right," he said, surprising himself with the decision. "We'll go to Oregon together, but we do this my way, and you follow my orders without question. Deal?" Evangeline's face lit up brighter than the 4th of July. "Deal." They spent the next 2 days preparing for the journey. Becca helped outfit Evangeline with proper traveling clothes and supplies, while Zeke studied maps and gathered information about the best routes north. The trip would take them through some of the roughest country in the West, but it was doable if they were careful. On their last night in Flagstaff, Reverend Patterson stopped by the boarding house one final time. "Are you certain about this, Mr. Morrison?" he asked. "The offer to take Evangeline in still stands. My wife and I would love her as our own." Zeke glanced at Evangeline, who was pretending to read a book, while obviously listening to every word of the conversation. "I appreciate that, Reverend, but the girl belongs with her family. I aim to see that she gets there, and if you don't find her father, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." After the Reverend left, Becca pulled Zeke aside for a private conversation. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "Taking a child into that wilderness?" "No," Zeke admitted. "I'm not sure about anything anymore, but I know I can't leave her behind. You've changed, you know, since you found her." "How so?" "You smile more, you talk more, you seem, I don't know, more human somehow." Zeke didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't try. They left Flagstaff at dawn. heading north toward the Colorado River. The plan was to follow the river northwest into Utah territory, then cut across to the Snake River and follow it into Oregon. It would be a journey of several hundred miles through some of the most unforgiving landscape in North America. For the first few days, Evangeline chattered constantly, asking questions about everything she saw. Why were the rocks red? What kind of animals lived in the desert? How did Indians find water in such a dry place? Zeke found himself enjoying her curiosity, even when he didn't have answers to her questions. On the fourth day, they encountered their first real danger. They were following a narrow canyon when Zeke spotted smoke rising from ahead. His hand went instinctively to his gun as he reined in Duchess. "What is it?" Evangeline whispered. "Could be nothing," Zeke replied, though his instincts told him otherwise. "Could be trouble. Either way, we're going to find out from up there." He guided Duchess up a rocky slope to a ridge overlooking the canyon floor. What he saw below made his blood run cold. 3 wagons were arranged in a defensive circle, but it was too late for defense. Bodies lay scattered around the campsite, and men on horseback were systematically looting the wagons. Cole Brennan and his gang. Zeke counted 8 riders, all armed and dangerous. Even from a distance, he could recognize Brennan's distinctive black hat and the way he sat his horse. The outlaw leader was examining something jewelry. From the look of it while his men finished stripping the wagons of anything valuable. "Are those the bad men?" Evangeline asked in a small voice. "Some of them," Zeke replied grimly. This was exactly the kind of situation he'd hoped to avoid by bringing her along. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As they watched, one of Brennan's men pointed up toward their ridge. They'd been spotted. "Hold on tight," Zeke told Evangeline, spurring Duchess into motion. "We're leaving, fast." But it was too late. 3 riders were already climbing the slope toward them, cutting off their retreat. Zeke drew his Colt and fired 2 quick shots, dropping one man from his saddle and sending the other to scrambling for cover. "This way," he shouted, guiding Duchess along the ridge toward a narrow trail he'd spotted earlier. It led down into another canyon, hopefully one that would provide some cover. Behind them, he could hear shouts and the thunder of hoof beats as more of Brennan's men joined the pursuit. Bullets whistled past them, one close enough to part Zeke's hair. The trail down into the canyon was treacherous, little more than a goat path carved into the rock face. Duchess picked her way carefully down the steep slope, while Zeke kept one arm wrapped around Evangeline and the other holding his gun. "I'm scared," Evangeline whispered. "I know you are," Zeke replied. "But remember what I told you about being brave. We're going to get out of this." At the bottom of the canyon, Zeke spotted a narrow crevice in the rock wall barely wide enough for a horse and rider, but it might provide temporary shelter. He guided Duchess into the opening just as the first of their pursuers appeared at the top of the trail. The crevice extended back into the rock for about 50 feet before opening into a small hidden valley. It was a perfect hiding place, assuming Brennan's men didn't know about it. "We'll wait here until dark," Zeke told Evangeline as he helped her down from the horse. "Then we'll try to slip past them. What if they find us?" Zeke checked his ammunition. 6 bullets left in his Colt, plus a dozen more in his belt. Not much against 8 men, but it would have to do. "Then we'll fight," he said simply. They spent the rest of the day in tense silence, listening for sounds of pursuit. Twice, they heard riders passing near the mouth of the crevice, but no one investigated the narrow opening. As darkness fell, Zeke began to hope they might have eluded their pursuers. That hope died when he heard Cole Brennan's voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I know you're in there, Morrison," the outlaw called. "Saw your tracks leading to that crack in the rock. You've got nowhere to go now." Zeke felt his blood turn to ice water. Somehow, Brennan knew who he was. That meant this wasn't a random encounter, it was a trap. "Who is that man?" Evangeline whispered. "Someone I should have killed a long time ago," Zeke replied. "Come on out, Morrison," Brennan continued. "Let's settle this like men. No need for the child to get hurt." Zeke considered his options. He could try to fight his way out, but the odds were terrible. He could surrender and hope Brennan would spare Evangeline, but that seemed unlikely given the outlaw's reputation. Or he could try to wait them out, but they had him trapped with no food or water. "What do you want?" "Brennan," Zeke called back. "What I've always wanted. You dead. You cost me a lot of good men over the years, bounty hunter. Time to pay the bill. And the girl, that depends on you. Come out with your hands up, and maybe I'll let her live. Try to fight, and she dies with you." Zeke looked at Evangeline, who was pressed against the rock wall with her doll clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she wasn't crying. She was being brave, just like she'd promised. "I have to go out there," he told her quietly. "No," she whispered. "They'll hurt you." "Maybe, but if I don't, they'll hurt both of us for certain. Can't we hide here forever?" "No. Little one, they'll wait us out. We don't have enough supplies." Evangeline was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the serious intelligence of a child who'd seen too much violence. "Will you tell them I'm not really with you?" she asked. "Maybe they'll let me go if they think you just found me." The suggestion broke Zeke's heart. Even now, facing the worst kind of danger, she was trying to protect him by removing herself. As a bargaining chip, "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly. "We're in this together, remember?" Before Evangeline could respond, Zeke heard movement at the mouth of the crevice. Brennan was getting impatient. "Time's up, Morrison," the outlaw called. "I'm sending my boys in. Won't be pretty when they find you." Zeke made his decision. He holstered his gun and picked up his rifle instead. At least with the rifle he had more range and stopping power. "Stay here," he told Evangeline. "No matter what happens, don't come out until I call for you. But promise me, I promise." Zeke made his way to the mouth of the crevice, using the rock walls for cover. He could see Brennan and his men positioned around the canyon, their horses hidden behind boulders and scrub brush. They had him surrounded, but the narrow opening would force them to come at him, one or two at a time. "Last chance, Morrison." Brennan shouted. "Go to hell," Zeke replied, and opened fire. His first shot took down the man trying to climb down from the canyon rim. The second scattered the two outlaws, approaching the crevice mouth, but return fire from multiple directions forced him back into cover. For the next hour, they traded shots sporadically. Zeke was careful with his ammunition, making every bullet count, while Brennan's men seemed content to keep him pinned down. They could afford to wait. They had him trapped, and time was on their side. As the night wore on, Zeke began to worry about Evangeline. The child had been silent for too long, and he couldn't risk calling out to her without revealing her exact location. "Getting tired yet?" "Morrison," Brennan taunted. "How long you think you can keep this up?" "Long enough," Zeke replied, though he knew it wasn't true. He was down to 3 bullets for his rifle and for his pistol. After that, it would be over. That's when he heard a sound that chilled him to the bone. Evangeline's voice, small and frightened, coming from behind him. "Don't hurt him. Please don't hurt him." Zeke spun around to see one of Brennan's men holding Evangeline by the arm. The outlaw must have found another way into the hidden valley, probably by climbing down from the canyon rim. "Drop your weapons," the man ordered, "or the girl gets it." Zeke looked into Evangeline's terrified eyes and saw his own failure reflected there. He'd promised to protect her, and he'd failed, just like he'd failed Martha and Thomas all those years ago. Slowly, he set down his rifle and raised his hands. "That's better," Cole Brennan said, appearing at the mouth of the crevice. "Bring them both out here, Jake." The outlaw named Jake prodded Zeke forward with his gun while maintaining his grip on Evangeline. Soon they were standing in the open canyon, surrounded by Brennan's remaining men. Well, Brennan said, studying his captives, the famous Zeke Morrison, reduced to playing nursemaid. "How the mighty have fallen." Brennan was a lean, dangerous-looking man with cold gray eyes and prematurely white hair. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, and Zeke could see why he'd survived as long as he had in the outlaw business. "The girl's got nothing to do with this," Zeke said. "Let her go and settle your business with me, but she does have something to do with this," Brennan replied. "See, word is you've gone soft, Morrison. Taking in strays, playing the family man. I want to know if that's true." "What do you mean?" Brennan drew his gun and pointed it at Evangeline. I mean, let's see how much this little brat means to you. I'm going to count to 10. If you don't get down on your knees and beg for her life, I'm going to put a bullet in her head." Zeke felt the world slow down around him. This was at the moment when all his failures came home to roost. He'd lost his own family to death, and now he was about to lose this brave little girl to his own inadequacies. 1. Brennan began counting. Zeke looked at Evangeline, who was staring back at him with absolute trust. She believed he would save her even now. The weight of that faith was almost unbearable. 2. "Please," Zeke said, his voice hoarse. "She's just a child." 3. 4. "I'll do whatever you want. Just let her go." 5. 6. Zeke dropped to his knees in the sandy canyon floor. "Please, Brennan, I'm begging you." 7. 8. "That's what I wanted to hear," Brennan said with a cruel smile. The great Zeke Morrison, groveling in the dirt for a little orphan girl. "My boys won't believe this when I tell them. Now let her go." "Oh, I don't think so. See, I've got a better idea. I'm going to keep the girl alive just long enough to watch you die. Then I'll kill her too. Nice and slow. That way, your last thought will be knowing you failed to save someone you cared about." Again, the words hit Zeke like physical blows. Brennan knew about Martha and Thomas somehow. The outlaw had learned about his greatest shame and was using it against him. "You bastard," Zeke snarled. Now, no need for name-calling. "Jake, tie Morrison up. I want him to have a good view of what's about to happen." As Jake moved to bind his hands, Zeke caught Evangeline's eye and gave her the slightest nod toward a large boulder about 20 feet away. She was a smart girl if she could somehow break free and reach cover. She might have a chance to escape in the darkness, but before Jake could finish tying the ropes, the night exploded in gunfire from the canyon rim above. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies, and Brennan's men began dropping one by one. "It's a trap," someone shouted, but the warning came too late. In the confusion, Evangeline broke free from her captor and ran toward the boulder Zeke had indicated. Jake turned to pursue her, but Zeke launched himself forward, tackling the outlaw and sending them both crashing to the ground. The canyon had become a war zone. Rifles cracked from above while Brennan's surviving men tried to find cover and return fire. But they were caught in the open with nowhere to hide, picked off methodically by unseen marksmen. Zeke grappled with Jake for control of the man's gun, finally managing to wrest it away and put a bullet in the outlaw's chest. Then he was moving, staying low and trying to reach Evangeline's hiding place. "Over here," he called to her, diving behind the boulder just as more shots rang out. "Who's shooting?" Evangeline asked, pressed against his side. "I don't know, but they're on our side." The battle was over in less than 5 minutes. When the smoke cleared, Cole Brennan and most of his gang lay dead in the canyon sand. Only one man remained standing, a familiar figure climbing down from the rim with a rifle in his hands, Sheriff Dale Hutchins, followed by what looked like half the population of Flagstaff. "You all right down there, Zeke?" the sheriff called. "We're fine," Zeke replied, hardly believing their luck. "How did you find us?" "Rebecca Thornfield, mostly. When that gang hit the Morrison place yesterday, she figured they might come after you next. We've been tracking them for 2 days." As the posse members climbed down into the canyon to check the bodies and collect weapons, Zeke sat with his back against the boulder, Evangeline pressed against his side. The child was shaking from delayed shock, but she was alive and unharmed. "Is it over?" she asked. "Yeah," Zeke said, smoothing her hair. "It's over. Are you going to leave me now?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you think that, miss?" "Becca said you only stayed because you felt sorry for me. Now that the bad men are gone, maybe you don't need to feel sorry for me anymore." Zeke lifted her chin so he could look into her eyes. "Listen to me, Evangeline. I don't stay with you because I feel sorry for you. I stay with you because you're important to me. More important than anything else in this world. Really, really. And we're still going to look for your papa, just like we planned." But even as he said the words, Zeke found himself wondering if that was really what he wanted. The past few days had shown him something he'd never expected to find again, a reason to live for someone other than himself. Sheriff Hutchins approached them, his weathered face creased with concern. "That was too close for comfort, Zeke. If we'd been an hour later, but you weren't." Zeke replied, "That's what matters. There's something else you should know. We found evidence in Brennan's camp that might interest you. Looks like he'd been planning to hit Flagstaff next, maybe within the week." The implications of that were staggering. If Zeke and Evangeline hadn't drawn Brennan away, the outlaw and his gang might have attacked the town, killing innocent people. Sometimes, it seemed, running toward danger instead of away from it was exactly the right thing to do. The ride back to Flagstaff took most of the next day. Evangeline rode with Zeke, dozing against his chest as Duchess carried them through the familiar landscape. When they finally reached the boarding house, Becca was waiting on the front porch with tears in her eyes. "Thank God you're both safe," she said, embracing them both. "I was so worried when we heard about the shooting." That evening, after Evangeline had been fed and bathed and put to bed, Zeke and Becca sat on the front porch discussing what came next. "You're not really going to Oregon, are you?" Becca asked. "I don't know," Zeke admitted. "Part of me thinks we should. The girl deserves to know what happened to her father." And the other part, Zeke was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking, and he could hear the faint sound of piano music from one of the saloons. "The other part thinks maybe she's already found what she's looking for," he said finally. "Which is a family." Becca smiled. "Took you long enough to figure that out." The next morning brought a visitor that changed everything. Zeke was in the stable grooming Duchess when Evangeline came running out, her face flushed with excitement. "Zeke, Zeke, come quick. There's a man here who says he knows Papa." Zeke's heart sank. After everything they'd been through, after he'd finally started to think of Evangeline as his daughter, was he about to lose her to her real father? The man waiting in Becca's parlor was tall and bearded, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in the mountains. He introduced himself as Marcus Webb, a trapper who worked the streams of eastern Oregon. "I knew Jonathan Hartwell," Webb said without preamble. "Worked a claim next to his on the Powder River for about 2 months last summer." "Is he?" Evangeline began, then couldn't finish the question. Webb's expression was gentle but sad. "I'm sorry, little miss. Your pa took sick with the fever in late August. We tried to save him, but there wasn't much we could do. He passed peaceful-like, though his last words were about you and your mama." Evangeline sat very still for a moment, processing this news. Then she began to cry, not the hysterical sobbing of a child, but the quiet, heartbroken tears of someone who'd lost the last link to her old life. Zeke knelt beside her chair and pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry, little one. I'm so sorry." "He brought this for the girl," Webb said, producing a small leather pouch. "Your pa asked me to see that she got it if anything happened to him." Inside the pouch were a few gold nuggets, not enough to make anyone rich, but proof that Jonathan Hartwell had indeed found what he was looking for. There was also a letter, written in a shaky hand on rough paper. "Dear Evangeline," Zeke read aloud, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and someone kind has helped you find your way. I am sorry I could not keep my promise to come back for you and your mama. I hope someday you will forgive me for leaving you both. The gold is yours, and I hope it will help you make a good life for yourself. Remember that your papa loved you more than anything in this world. Be good, be brave, and be happy. Your loving father, Jonathan Hartwell." When Zeke finished reading, Evangeline was crying harder, but she was also holding tight to his shirt, as if afraid he might disappear too. "What happens now?" she asked through her tears. Zeke looked at her tear-streaked face and made the most important decision of his life. "Now we go home," he said. "But where is home? Wherever we make it," Zeke replied. Together, 3 months later, Zeke stood on the porch of a small ranch house about 10 miles outside of Flagstaff. The house wasn't much, just for rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. He'd used the reward money from Cole Brennan, combined with Jonathan Hartwell's gold, to make a down payment on the property. Zeke. Evangeline called from the corral where she was helping him train a young horse. "Come see. Buttercup is letting me brush her without fussing." Buttercup was a 2-year-old filly that had come with the ranch. along with a handful of cattle and an old bull named Moses. It wasn't the grand spread Zeke had once dreamed of owning, but it was a start. That's because you're being patient with her, Zeke called back. Animals can sense when you're trying to rush them. As he watched Evangeline work with the horse, Zeke marveled at how much had changed in such a short time. The frightened, traumatized child he'd found beside her mother's grave had blossomed into a confident, happy little girl. She was attending the school in town 3 days a week, had made friends with the neighboring children, and seemed to have adjusted to their new life with remarkable resilience. Becca had been instrumental in helping them set up their household, teaching Evangeline domestic skills while helping Zeke learn the basics of ranching. It turned out that farming wasn't so different from tracking. Both required patience, observation, and the ability to read signs that others might miss. Mr. Morrison? Zeke turned to see a young man on horseback approaching the house. The rider wore a badge that identified him as a territorial marshal. That's right, Zeke said. What can I do for you, Marshal? Marshal Tom Bradley, the man said, dismounting. I've got a proposition for you if you're interested. What kind of proposition? The territorial government is looking for experienced men to serve as deputy marshals. Good pay, steady work, and you'd be based here in Flagstaff. No more chasing outlaws all over creation. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Zeke would have jumped at a year ago. Steady work in law enforcement, using his skills to keep the peace without the uncertainty of bounty hunting. I appreciate the offer, Marshal, but I'm not in that line of work anymore. Bradley looked around at the ranch with a skeptical expression. You're really going to give up being a lawman to raise cattle? I'm going to give up being a lawman to raise a daughter, Zeke corrected. The marshal's expression softened. The little girl. I heard about how you found her. That was a good thing you did. Best thing I ever did, Zeke said, and meant it. After Bradley left, Zeke walked out to the corral where Evangeline was still working with Buttercup. The girl had a natural way with animals, and several of the neighboring ranchers had already commented on her abilities. Who was that man? She asked as Zeke leaned against the fence. A marshal. He wanted to offer me a job. Evangeline's face grew worried. What kind of job? One that would take you away? No, this one would keep me right here in Flagstaff. But I told him I wasn't interested. Why? Because I already have a job. The most important job in the world. What job is that? Zeke smiled and opened the gate to the corral, stepping inside to help her with the horse. Being your father. Evangeline's face lit up with pure joy. It was the first time he'd used that word to describe their relationship, and they both knew it meant everything had changed. Really? You want to be my papa? I want to be your papa more than anything, Zeke said, kneeling down so they were at eye level. If you'll have me. Yes. Evangeline threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him over. Yes, 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 as he held his daughter because that's what she was now. In every way that mattered, Zeke felt a peace he hadn't experienced since before the war. The broken-down bounty hunter was gone, replaced by a man with something worth living for. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Evangeline asked one more question. Will you tell me about my other papa sometimes, the one who went to California? Of course I will, Zeke promised. Jonathan Hartwell was a good man who loved you very much. You should never forget that. And will you tell me about your little boy, Thomas? The question surprised him, but he realized he was ready to answer it. Yes, I'll tell you about Thomas, and about your Mama Martha too. Mama Martha? That's what Martha would have wanted you to call her. She always said our house would be full of children someday. I think she would have loved you very much. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Zeke thought about the long, strange journey that had brought them to this place. A massacre on a desert trail had cost Evangeline her mother and birth father, but it had also led her to a new family. Sometimes, he reflected, the worst tragedies could become the foundation for the greatest blessings. I love you, Papa, Evangeline said sleepily, curled up against his side. I love you too, daughter, Zeke replied, and for the first time in years, he meant those words with his whole heart. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods around their little ranch. carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and second chances. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted its ancient song. But on the porch of their home, all was peaceful. A man who had lost everything had found it again in the trust and love of a little girl, and a little girl who had lost her family had discovered that sometimes the best families aren't born, they're chosen. As they sat together under the vast Arizona sky, both father and daughter knew they were exactly where they belonged. The trail that had brought them together had been marked by sorrow and violence, but it had led them home. And in the end, that made all the difference. Flagstaff, Arizona Territory. 1888. The sound of children's laughter drifted across the valley as Zeke Morrison stood in his fields, watching the sun set behind the San Francisco peaks. His ranch had grown considerably over the past 5 years. What had started as a small homestead was now a thriving cattle operation with over 300 head of stock. Papa, 11-year-old Evangeline came running toward him, her long brown hair flying behind her like a banner. She was no longer the frightened, traumatized child he'd found beside that burned wagon train. She'd grown into a confident, capable young lady who could rope a steer, shoot a rifle, and cook a meal with equal skill. "What is it, sweetheart?" Zeke asked, catching her in his arms and swinging her round. "Mrs. Patterson from town brought a letter. It's from the territorial governor." Zeke's heart skipped a beat. Official letters from the capital usually meant one of two things: trouble or opportunity. He hoped it was the latter. Inside the house, which had grown from 4 rooms to 8 over the years, Becca Thornfield Morrison sat at the kitchen table with the letter in her hands. Yes, Becca was now his wife, having married him 3 years earlier in a simple ceremony at the Flagstaff church. She'd sold her boarding house and moved to the ranch, bringing her business skills and warm heart to their growing family. "Well," Zeke asked, settling into his chair, "what does the governor want?" "He wants to offer you the position of territorial marshal," Becca said, her voice carefully neutral. "Full authority over law enforcement from the Colorado River to the New Mexico border. The pay is substantial, and you'd be based right here in Flagstaff." Evangeline's eyes grew wide. "That's important, isn't it?" "Very important," Zeke confirmed, "but also very dangerous for a moment." The old hunger stirred in him, the desire to pin on a badge again, to be the man who stood between civilization and chaos. But then he looked at his family, at the life they'd built together, and the feeling passed. "What did you tell them?" Becca asked. "Nothing yet. The messenger is waiting for an answer." "What are you going to tell them?" Zeke stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the land he'd worked so hard to build up. In the corral, his prize bull Moses was grazing peacefully in the pasture beyond. Cattle bore his brand, the Double E, for Evangeline and Ezekiel. This was his kingdom now, small but his own. "I'm going to tell them I already have a job," he said finally, "the most important job a man can have." "What job is that?" Evangeline asked, though she was grinning because she already knew the answer. "Being your papa," Zeke said, pulling her close, "and Becca's husband, and making sure this ranch is something we can all be proud of." The messenger left that evening with a polite but firm refusal. Some of the men in town thought Zeke was crazy for turning down such a prestigious position, but he didn't care what they thought. He had everything he needed right here. 20 years later, minus 1908, the town of Flagstaff had grown into a proper city by 1908, with electric lights, telephone lines, and even a few of those horseless carriages puttering down the main street. But some things never changed. The San Francisco peaks still dominated the horizon, and the desert winds still carried the scent of sage and juniper. 68-year-old Zeke Morrison sat on his front porch, watching his grandchildren play in the yard. Evangeline had married young Dr. William Cartwright 5 years earlier, and they'd blessed Zeke and Becca with 3 beautiful grandchildren: Thomas, named for Zeke's first son; Martha, named for his first wife; and little Jonathan, named for Evangeline's birth father. Grandpa Zeke, 4-year-old Thomas, called out, "Tell us the story again." "What story is that?" "Little man, the story about how you found Grandma Evangeline by the burned wagons." Zeke chuckled. The children never tired of hearing about the day that changed all their lives. He'd told the story hundreds of times over the years, but somehow it never got old. Well, he began, settling back in his rocking chair. It was the summer of 1883, and I was riding through the desert when I saw smoke rising in the distance. As he spoke, painting pictures with words of a frontier that was rapidly disappearing, Zeke reflected on the strange turns life could take. He'd started as a soldier, become a bounty hunter, and ended up a rancher and family man. Each phase had taught him something different about what it meant to be alive. And then what happened? Little Martha asked breathlessly, even though she knew the story by heart. Then I heard a sound, the softest little whimper, like a lost kitten. And there, sitting beside her poor mama, was the most beautiful little girl I'd ever seen. Later that evening, after the grandchildren had been taken home and Becca had gone to bed, Zeke sat alone on the porch with his thoughts. His hair was white now, his face lined with age and weather, but his eyes were still sharp and his hands still steady. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Zeke made a wish, not for himself, but for all the children who might one day find themselves lost and alone in this world. He wished that each of them would find someone to take them in, to love them, to give them a chance at happiness. What are you thinking about? Becca's voice came from the doorway. Just remembering, Zeke said, reaching for her hand as she settled beside him, thinking about how one day can change everything. Any regrets? Zeke considered the question seriously. He'd given up his chance at glory, at fame, at being remembered as one of the great lawmen of the frontier. Instead, he'd chosen a quiet life of family and hard work. None, he said finally. Not a single one. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, the sound of progress, of a world moving forward into the 20th century. But here on their porch, surrounded by the life they'd built together, the past and present came together in perfect harmony. The story of Ezekiel Morrison and Evangeline Hartwell was more than just a tale of the Old West. It was a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds, and proof that sometimes the best families aren't born, they're chosen. As the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, grandfather and grandmother sat together in comfortable silence, to people who had found in each other exactly what they needed to make their lives complete. And somewhere in the darkness, the desert wind whispered its eternal song, a lullaby for all the lost souls who had found their way home. Flagstaff, Arizona, 1925. The funeral of Ezekiel Morrison was attended by nearly the entire town. At 85, he had lived to see Arizona become a state, to see the frontier era end and the modern age begin. But to those who knew him best, he would always be remembered not as a famous lawman or successful rancher, but as the man who had chosen love over glory. Evangeline Morrison Cartwright, now 48 and a grandmother herself, stood at the graveside as the preacher spoke. The final words. In her hand, she clutched a worn rag doll, the same one she'd held that terrible day in 1883 when Zeke had found her beside her mother's grave. After the service, as friends and neighbors shared their memories, Evangeline's youngest granddaughter tugged at her skirt. "Grandma, why is everyone so sad? Didn't great-grandpa Zeke have a good life?" Evangeline knelt down to the child's level, just as Zeke had done with her so many years ago. "He had a wonderful life, sweetheart. We're not sad because his life was bad. We're sad because it's over. But you know what? What? The love he shared with all of us, that never ends. That goes on and on. From parents to children to grandchildren, forever and ever." That night, Evangeline sat in her father's study, reading through his journals. Zeke had been a meticulous record keeper, documenting not just the business of ranching, but the small moments that made up a life. Evangeline's first day of school, her first horse, her wedding day, the birth of each grandchild. One entry dated 5 years after he'd found her caught her attention. "Today Evangeline asked me if I ever regret giving up bounty hunting to raise her." The question surprised me, because I've never thought of it as giving something up. The truth is, hunting outlaws only taught me how to take life. Raising Evangeline has taught me how to give it. I was a dead man when I found her beside that wagon train. She brought me back to life. Tears blurred Evangeline's vision as she read. Those words, even now, decades later. She could remember the kindness in Zeke's eyes when he'd first approached her in the desert. He'd saved her life that day, but reading his journal, she realized she'd saved his too. The next morning, Evangeline made a decision. She would write down their story, all of it, from that terrible day in 1883 to Zeke's peaceful death in his own bed, surrounded by the family he'd built through love and determination. It would be a story for her grandchildren and their grandchildren, a reminder that in a world often filled with cruelty and loss, love and kindness could still triumph. It would be Zeke's real legacy, not the outlaws he'd captured or the cattle he'd raised, but the family he'd created through an act of simple human compassion. As she began to write, Evangeline could almost hear Zeke's voice beside her, telling her to get the details right, to make sure future generations understood what it meant to choose love over everything else. In the Arizona Territory, in the year 1883, a young girl was left beside her dead mother on the trail. A silent cowboy took her in, and together they discovered that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born with. The story of Zeke and Evangeline became a cherished family legend, passed down through generations of Morrisons and Cartwrights. It reminded them all that no matter how dark the world might seem, there was always hope, hope that someone would care enough to stop, to help, to choose love over indifference. And in the end, that was the greatest treasure of all.